Dust kicked up around the military convoy as it rolled through the rocky terrain of Afghanistan. Inside the lead vehicle, Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun adjusted her medical kit for the third time in 10 minutes. Her hands were steady, but her mind raced with the usual pre-mission thoughts. At 26, she had already served 2 tours of duty, but this deployment felt different. The tension in the air was thicker, and the enemy seemed more determined than ever. Sarah had joined the Army straight out of high school, driven by a desire to serve her country and make a difference. Her petite frame and quiet demeanor often led people to underestimate her, but those who knew her understood the steel beneath her calm exterior. She had trained extensively as a combat medic, learning not just how to heal, but how to fight when necessary. Yet, in the eyes of many of her male colleagues, she remained just the medic, someone to patch them up, not someone to stand beside them in combat. The convoy consisted of 12 soldiers heading to a forward operating base near the Pakistan border. Intelligence reports suggested increased Taliban activity in the area, but this was supposed to be a routine supply run. Sarah's job was to ensure medical supplies reached the base and to provide support if anyone got injured along the way. She had made this journey dozens of times before, but something about today felt off. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, the squad leader, glanced back at Sarah through the vehicle's interior. Mike was a good soldier and a decent man, but he shared the common belief that women belonged in support roles, not on the front lines. He had never been openly hostile towards Sarah, but she could sense his skepticism about having a female medic embedded with their unit. "Doc, you sure you're ready for this?" Mike asked, using the nickname all medics earned regardless of their actual medical training level. "Intel says it might get hot out there today." Sarah nodded calmly. "I've been ready since day one, Sergeant. My job is to keep everyone healthy and get them home safely." The vehicle's radio crackled to life. "Alpha Team, this is Base Command. Be advised, we've lost contact with Bravo Team about 2 clicks from your position. Proceed with extreme caution." The atmosphere in the convoy immediately shifted. Lost contact usually meant one of 2 things: equipment failure or enemy contact. Given the area they were traversing, everyone suspected the latter. Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, but her training kicked in. She mentally reviewed the locations of her medical supplies and checked that her sidearm was secure. As they continued down the narrow mountain road, Sarah noticed how quiet the landscape had become. No birds, no distant sounds of village life, just the rumble of their engines and the crunch of gravel under their tires. She had learned to read the environment during her previous deployments. This silence usually preceded trouble. Rodriguez called out Private Jackson from the driver's seat. "You seeing what I'm seeing up ahead?" Through the dusty windshield, they could make out smoke rising from behind a rocky outcropping about half a mile ahead. The convoy slowed as they approached what appeared to be the remains of military vehicles. Sarah's stomach dropped as she recognized the distinctive camouflage pattern of American Humvees. "That's Bravo Team," Mike said grimly into his radio. "Base Command, Alpha Team has eyes on what appears to be Bravo Team's position. Multiple vehicles down, requesting permission to investigate. Alpha Team, proceed with caution. Provide immediate assessment of casualties and enemy disposition." As their convoy approached the ambush site, Sarah could see the devastating effectiveness of the attack. 3 Humvees had been hit by what appeared to be a coordinated assault involving rocket-propelled grenades and small arms fire. 1 vehicle had flipped completely over, while another burned fiercely. The third sat at an odd angle, its front end demolished. The convoy stopped about 200 meters from the wreckage. Sarah immediately grabbed her medical bag and prepared to move forward, but Mike held up his hand. "Wait here, document. We need to secure the area first. Could still be hostiles around." Sarah watched as the soldiers spread out in formation, their weapons ready. Every instinct told her to move forward and start treating any survivors, but military protocol demanded area security first. She forced herself to remain patient, though every second felt like an eternity when lives might hang in the balance. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The all clear came through the radio. Area appears secure. Doc, we've got wounded. Sarah moved quickly toward the wreckage, her medical training taking over completely. The scene was worse than it had appeared from a distance. Bodies lay scattered around the vehicles, some clearly beyond help. But as she approached the overturned Humvee, she heard something that made her heart leap, a weak voice calling for help. Over here, she called to the rest of the team. About survivors. Working quickly, Sarah began triaging the wounded. There were 4 survivors from Bravo team, all in critical condition. The worst was Corporal Davis, who had severe shrapnel wounds and was losing blood rapidly. Sarah immediately began applying pressure bandages and started in 4-line to replace lost fluids. As she worked, she could hear Mike coordinating with base command for immediate medical evacuation. But the response was not what anyone wanted to hear. Alpha Team, negative on immediate medevac. Enemy activity has increased throughout the sector. Birds are grounded until the area can be cleared. Estimated time for extraction is 4 to 6 hours. 4 to 6 hours. Sarah looked at Corporal Davis's pale face and knew he didn't have that long. None of the critically wounded soldiers did. She would have to keep them alive through field medicine alone in hostile territory with limited supplies. Rodriguez, she called out, I need all the medical supplies from every vehicle. These men won't make it 4 hours without aggressive treatment. Mike nodded and began organizing the collection of medical supplies. As Sarah continued working on the wounded, she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. High up on the ridgeline, perhaps 800 meters away, she caught the glint of metal reflecting sunlight. Contact, she yelled, just as the first sniper shot rang out. The bullet struck the ground less than 2 feet from where she knelt beside Corporal Davis. Immediately, the soldiers around her took cover behind the disabled vehicles and began returning fire toward the ridgeline. Sarah found herself in an impossible situation. Her wounded patients needed immediate medical attention, but staying exposed made her an easy target for the sniper. Doc, get behind cover, Mike shouted from behind the burned-out Humvee. But Sarah couldn't abandon her patients. Instead, she dragged the most critically wounded soldier, Corporal Davis, behind the limited protection of the overturned vehicle and continued her work. Another shot rang out, this one closer than the first. She could hear more enemy positions opening fire from different locations around their position. We're surrounded, called out Private Martinez from the far side of their defensive perimeter. I count at least 3 firing positions, maybe more. Sarah realized they were trapped. The enemy had let them approach the ambush site and tend to the wounded before springing their own trap. Now Alpha Team was pinned down in an exposed position with 4 critically wounded soldiers and limited ammunition for a prolonged firefight. As she worked to stabilize another wounded soldier, Sarah caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. Through a gap in the rocks near the burning Humvee, she could see enemy fighters moving to flank their position. They were being systematically surrounded, and their current defensive position would soon become untenable. Rodriguez, she called out over the gunfire. They're moving to flank us from the east. Mike adjusted his position to get a better view of what Sarah had spotted. Damn it, you're right. We can't hold this position much longer. That's when Sarah noticed something else, something that would change everything. Partially hidden beneath a tarp in the back of one of Bravo Team's damaged vehicles was the distinctive shape of a Barrett M82 sniper rifle. The weapon appeared undamaged, and Sarah could see several boxes of .50 caliber ammunition nearby. Sarah had trained on the Barrett during her advanced combat courses, though she had never used one in actual combat. The rifle was typically reserved for designated marksmen and snipers, not medics. But Sarah had always been an exceptional shot, and she understood the weapon's capabilities. The Barrett could reach targets at distances far beyond the enemy's current firing positions. More importantly, its massive .50 caliber rounds could penetrate cover that stopped smaller rifle rounds. If she could get to the weapon and find a good firing position, she might be able to eliminate the enemy sniper who was keeping them pinned down and pick off the fighters trying to flank their position. But using the Barrett would mean leaving her wounded patients, even temporarily. It went against every instinct she had as a medic. Her job was to heal, not to kill. Yet as another sniper round cracked past her position and she watched Private Jackson take a hit in the shoulder, Sarah realized that sometimes the best way to save lives was to take them. The wounded soldier she was treating, Specialist Kumar, grabbed her arm weakly. "Doc," he whispered, "that Barrett, you know how to use it?" Sarah looked into his eyes and saw not just pain but trust. He was asking her to do something that went against her primary role as a medic, but he understood what she understood. Sometimes you had to become a warrior to remain a healer. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I know how to use it." Kumar nodded slightly. "Then go use it. We're not getting out of here otherwise." Sarah made her decision. She quickly finished applying a pressure bandage to Kumar's leg wound and grabbed the medical supplies she would need for the other wounded soldiers. Then, she began moving carefully toward the damaged vehicle containing the Barrett rifle. The enemy sniper seemed to track her movement, sending another round that struck the ground inches from her feet. Sarah dove behind a large rock and waited for the next shot. When it came, she noted the direction and approximate distance. The sniper was positioned on the ridge about 600 meters away, well within the Barrett's effective range. Reaching the damaged Humvee, Sarah quickly examined the Barrett rifle. The weapon appeared functional, and the scope was still properly mounted. She grabbed the rifle and as much ammunition as she could carry, then began looking for a suitable firing position. The key would be finding somewhere with a clear line of sight to the enemy positions, but with enough cover to protect her from return fire. About 50 meters from their current position, she spotted what looked like a small outcropping of rocks that might work. "Rodriguez," she called out. "I'm going to try to take out that sniper. Cover me while I move to that rock formation." Mike looked at her with surprise. "Doc, that's not your job. You're a medic, not a sniper." "Right now," Sarah replied, checking the Barrett's action one more time. "I'm whatever these soldiers need me to be." Without waiting for Mike's approval, Sarah began moving toward the rock formation. The Barrett rifle was heavy, nearly 30 pounds fully loaded, but she managed it with the same determination that had carried her through every challenge in her military career. Behind her, she could hear her squad mates laying down, covering fire to mask her movement. The 50-meter dash felt like a mile. Every step exposed her to potential enemy fire, and she knew the sniper was probably tracking her movement through a scope. Sarah used every piece of cover available, moving from rock to rock, vehicle to vehicle, always keeping something between herself and the known enemy positions. When she finally reached the rock outcropping, Sarah quickly assessed her new position. The rocks provided excellent cover from the main enemy positions, and she had clear lines of sight to both the ridge where the sniper was positioned and the area where enemy fighters were attempting to flank Alpha Team's position. Sarah set up the Barrett on its bipod and settled into a prone firing position behind the rocks. Through the rifle's powerful scope, she could see the enemy sniper's position clearly for the first time. He was well concealed among the rocks on the ridge, but Sarah could make out the glint of his rifle barrel and part of his upper body. The distance was approximately 580 meters according to her scope's rangefinder, a challenging shot but well within the Barrett's capabilities. Sarah had to account for wind conditions, the slight upward angle to the target, and the fact that she was shooting under combat stress for the first time in her career. She controlled her breathing and settled the crosshairs on the target. The enemy sniper seemed to be focused on a main group of soldiers around the vehicles and hadn't yet spotted Sarah's new position. This might be her only chance for a clean shot before he realized the threat. Sarah squeezed the trigger slowly, just as she had been taught. The Barrett's massive muzzle blast was deafening, and the recoil drove the rifle back against her shoulder with tremendous force. Through the scope, she watched as her bullet found its target. The enemy sniper's rifle tumbled from his position, and he disappeared behind the rocks. "Target down," she called out to her squad mates. "Sniper eliminated." The immediate effect was dramatic. Without the precision fire from the enemy sniper keeping them pinned down, Alpha Team could move more freely and return more effective fire. Sarah could hear Mike coordinating the team's defensive efforts with renewed confidence. But Sarah's work wasn't finished. Through her scope, she could see the enemy fighters who had been moving to flank their position. They were now exposed as they tried to reach better cover, and Sarah had clear shots at several of them. The Barrett's .50 caliber rounds were devastating against personnel targets. Sarah's next 3 shots eliminated the flanking threat entirely, each round finding its mark with precision that surprised even her. She had trained extensively with various weapons, but she had never imagined she would be using those skills in actual combat. As the immediate threat diminished, Sarah realized she could hear something else over the gunfire, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. She grabbed her radio and contacted Base Command. Base Command, this is Alpha Team Medic. I can hear rotors approaching from the south. Please confirm if medevac is en route. Alpha Team, affirmative. Threat level in your sector has decreased sufficiently to allow limited air operations. Medevac is approximately 10 minutes out. Sarah felt a surge of relief. The wounded soldiers might actually make it, but 10 minutes was still a long time in a firefight, and she could see more enemy movement on the ridgelines around their position. Using the Barrett's powerful scope, Sarah began systematically identifying and engaging enemy positions that posed threats to the incoming medevac helicopter. The rifle's incredible range allowed her to reach targets that were well beyond the effective range of the enemy's small arms fire. With each shot, Sarah felt the contradiction of her situation more acutely. She had joined the military to save lives, not take them. Yet every enemy fighter she eliminated increased the chances that her wounded comrades would survive long enough to reach proper medical care. Between shots, she kept one eye on the wounded soldiers behind the vehicles. She could see Mike and the other team members doing their best to maintain the medical care she had started, but they lacked her training and experience. Corporal Davis in particular seemed to be deteriorating rapidly. "Rodriguez," she called out. "How's Davis doing?" "Not good, Doc. He needs you back here." Sarah faced another impossible choice. The enemy forces were still active around their position, but her skills were needed in 2 places at once. She decided to continue engaging targets until the medevac arrived, then focus entirely on keeping the wounded alive during transport. Through her scope, Sarah spotted what appeared to be an enemy commander coordinating the attack from a position about 700 meters away. The shot was at the extreme edge of her comfort zone, but eliminating the commander might disrupt the enemy's coordination enough to allow the medevac to land safely. Sarah adjusted her scope for the increased distance and took careful aim. The target was partially concealed behind rocks, exposing only his head and shoulders. It was the kind of shot that separated expert marksmen from average ones. She controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger. The Barrett roared again, and through the scope, Sarah watched as the enemy commander dropped from sight. Almost immediately, the coordinated fire from the remaining enemy positions became sporadic and disorganized. "Medevac inbound, 2 minutes," came a call over the radio. Sarah could now clearly hear the approaching helicopter. She continued scanning for threats while simultaneously planning the medical evacuation in her mind. The most critically wounded would have to go first, but all 4 survivors needed immediate advanced medical care. As the medevac helicopter appeared over the ridge, Sarah spotted one final threat: an enemy fighter with what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, positioned to target the landing helicopter. The range was extreme, nearly 800 meters, and the target was moving. Sarah tracked the fighter through her scope and fired. The massive .50 caliber round struck home just as the enemy fighter was raising his weapon. The RPG round fired harmlessly into the air as the fighter fell. The medevac helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust behind the disabled vehicles. Sarah immediately abandoned her position with the Barrett and ran back to her wounded patients. The specialized medical crew from the helicopter began working with her to stabilize the wounded for transport. "Doc," Corporal Davis whispered as Sarah checked his vitals. "Heard you got them all." Sarah smiled grimly. "Just doing my job, Corporal. All of it." The evacuation proceeded smoothly. All 4 wounded soldiers were loaded onto the medevac helicopter and transported to the advanced medical facility at the main base. Sarah rode with them, continuing medical care during the flight. As the helicopter lifted off, Sarah looked down at the battlefield where she had been forced to become something she had never intended to be. The Barrett rifle lay where she had left it among the rocks, its job done. She knew that word of what had happened would spread quickly through the unit. During the flight, she worked tirelessly to keep the wounded soldiers stable. 2 of them were conscious enough to talk, and both expressed their gratitude for what she had done. They understood, perhaps better than anyone else could, the difficult choice she had made. "Doc," Specialist Kumar said as she adjusted his foreline, "you saved all our lives today. Not just with the medical stuff, with the shooting too." Sarah nodded, but didn't respond immediately. She was still processing what had happened. In the span of less than an hour, she had transitioned from medic to sniper and back to medic again. Each role had been necessary to ensure the survival of her fellow soldiers. The helicopter landed at the main base's medical facility, and Sarah helped transfer the wounded soldiers to the emergency trauma team. All 4 would survive their injuries, though Corporal Davis would require extensive surgery and rehabilitation. As Sarah walked out of the medical facility, she was surprised to find a crowd of soldiers waiting for her. Word of her actions had indeed spread quickly, and she could see a mixture of respect, amazement, and curiosity in their faces. Sergeant Rodriguez approached her first. "Doc," he said simply, "I owe you an apology." "We all do." Sarah looked at him with confusion. "For what, Sergeant?" "For thinking your only job was patching us up. Today you showed us that you're a soldier first, medic second, and one hell of a shot when it matters." The other soldiers nodded in agreement. Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed in how they viewed her. She was no longer just the medic. She was a full member of the team who had proven herself under the most extreme circumstances possible. But Sarah also knew that the day's events would stay with her for the rest of her life. Taking lives, even enemy lives in combat, was not something she could easily reconcile with her calling as a healer. She would need time to process what had happened and find a way to integrate this experience into her understanding of herself and her role as a soldier. That evening, as she sat in her quarters writing her after-action report, Sarah reflected on the events of the day. She had been forced to become a weapon of war, to protect the lives she had sworn to preserve. It was a contradiction that would define the rest of her military career and shape her understanding of what it truly meant to serve. The weeks following the ambush brought changes that Sarah had never anticipated. News of her actions spread far beyond her immediate unit, eventually reaching the highest levels of command. Within days, reporters were requesting interviews, and military officials were discussing commendations and awards. Sarah found herself uncomfortable with the attention. She had done what needed to be done to save lives, nothing more. The idea that her actions were somehow exceptional bothered her. Every soldier in her unit would have done the same thing if they had possessed the skills and opportunity. The wounded soldiers from Bravo Team all recovered, though Corporal Davis faced a long rehabilitation process. When he was finally able to receive visitors, Sarah was among the first to see him at the base medical facility. "Doc," Davis said as she approached his bed, "I heard they're talking about giving you the Silver Star." Sarah shook her head. "That's not why I did it, Davis. I just wanted to get you and the others home safe." "I know that," Davis replied. "That's exactly why you deserve it." The conversation with Davis helped Sarah understand something important. Her discomfort with recognition wasn't about modesty. It was about the fundamental contradiction she felt between her roles as healer and warrior. The Silver Star would recognize her combat effectiveness, but what she really wanted was recognition for keeping 4 soldiers alive under impossible circumstances. Captain Williams, The base commander called Sarah to his office 3 days after the incident. She expected a routine debriefing, but instead found herself facing a panel of senior officers, including a colonel she didn't recognize. Staff Sergeant Chun, Captain Williams began, "Your actions during the rescue operation have generated significant interest at division level. Colonel Harrison here is from Personnel Command, and he has some questions about your training background." Colonel Harrison consulted his notes before speaking. "Sergeant Chun, according to your records, you qualified expert on multiple weapon systems during basic training, including long-range precision rifles. You also completed advanced marksmanship courses that are typically reserved for designated marksmen. Why weren't you assigned to a sniper unit?" Sarah had wondered the same thing herself over the years. "Sir, I requested assignment as a combat medic. I felt that saving lives was more important than taking them. Yet when circumstances required it, you demonstrated exceptional skill with the Barrett system. Your confirmed kills during the engagement included targets at ranges exceeding 750 meters under combat conditions. That level of precision suggests natural ability beyond what training alone can provide." The colonel leaned forward. "The Army is considering establishing new protocols for combat medics in forward positions. Your experience suggests that medics with advanced combat skills could provide capabilities that purely medical personnel cannot. We're interested in your thoughts on cross-training programs." Sarah realized she was being asked to help design training that would create soldiers like herself, medics who could fight effectively when necessary. The idea was both appealing and troubling. Such training might save lives, but it would also fundamentally change the nature of the medic's role. "Sir," she said carefully, "I think any medic serving with combat units should have advanced weapons training, but their primary identity should always be as healers. What I did was necessary, but I never want it to overshadow the medical mission." The colonel nodded. "Understood. We're not looking to create soldier medics, but rather to ensure our medical personnel can defend themselves and their patients when required." After the meeting, Sarah felt conflicted. She understood the logic behind cross-training combat medics, but she worried about the implications. Would future medics be expected to engage in combat as readily as she had? Would the enemy begin targeting medics more aggressively if they were seen as legitimate combatants? These questions became more pressing when Sarah learned that her story was being considered for inclusion in military training materials. The Army wanted to use her experience as an example of adaptive thinking and mission flexibility under extreme circumstances. Sarah requested a meeting with the base chaplain to discuss her feelings about the situation. Chaplain Roberts was an experienced officer who had counseled many soldiers dealing with the psychological aftermath of combat. "Sarah," the chaplain said as they sat in his office, "what troubles you most about what happened?" "I became a medic to save lives," Sarah replied. "During that firefight, I took 7 lives to save 4. The mathematics work out, but it doesn't feel right. Do you believe those 7 enemy fighters would have shown mercy to your wounded soldiers?" Sarah shook her head. "No, they would have killed every one of us." "Then, you didn't take 7 lives to save 4. You took 7 lives to save 11, the 4 wounded soldiers and the 7 members of Alpha Team." The chaplain's perspective helped, but Sarah continued to struggle with the duality of her actions. She was a healer who had become, temporarily, a very effective killer. Reconciling these roles would be an ongoing process. 2 weeks after the incident, Sarah received notification that she was being awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action. The citation read, in part, "for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action while engaged with an armed enemy." Staff Sergeant Chin repeatedly exposed herself to hostile fire while treating wounded soldiers, then demonstrated exceptional marksmanship skills to eliminate multiple enemy threats and enable successful medical evacuation. The award ceremony was attended by most of the base personnel and several visiting dignitaries. Sarah stood at attention as the medal was pinned to her uniform, but her thoughts were with the 4 soldiers she had helped save and the families of the enemy fighters who would not be going home. After the ceremony, Sergeant Rodriguez approached her. "Doc, I've been thinking about what happened out there. You know what impressed me most?" Sarah shook her head. "It wasn't the shooting, though that was incredible. It was that you went right back to being a medic the moment the medevac landed. You never lost sight of who you are and what your real job is." Rodriguez's words resonated with Sarah. She had worried that the combat role might change her fundamental identity as a medic. But perhaps the opposite was true. Her unwavering commitment to her medical mission had driven her to extraordinary measures to protect her patients. In the months that followed, Sarah continued serving as a combat medic, but her role within the unit had evolved. Her demonstrated combat skills made her a natural choice for high-risk missions where medical support might come under fire. She found herself training other medics in advanced combat techniques, helping them develop skills she hoped they would never need to use. The cross-training program Colonel Harrison had discussed became reality 6 months later. Sarah was asked to help develop the curriculum, ensuring that combat effectiveness training didn't overshadow medical education. The program emphasized that combat skills were a last resort, to be used only when medical personnel had no other way to protect their patients. Sarah also began speaking at military medical conferences about the psychological challenges of dual roles in combat. Her presentations helped other medics understand that having to fight didn't diminish their identity as healers. Sometimes it was the ultimate expression of their commitment to preserving life. 1 year after the ambush, Sarah received a letter from Corporal Davis, who had completed his rehabilitation and returned to active duty. The letter included a photo of his wedding day and a simple message: "Doc, without what you did that day, this day would never have happened. Thank you for being exactly who we needed you to be." Sarah kept the letter and photo in her medical kit as a reminder of why she had chosen to serve. Her identity as a healer remained paramount. But she had learned that sometimes the greatest act of healing required the temporary embrace of warfare. The Barrett rifle that had changed everything remained in the unit's armory, but it was no longer just another weapon. It had become a symbol of the extraordinary measures that ordinary soldiers could take when faced with impossible circumstances. Sarah continued her military career for 8 more years, eventually retiring as a master sergeant. She served in 3 more deployments, but never again had to use a sniper rifle in combat. The skills remained sharp through regular training, but she was grateful that circumstances never again required their use. After leaving the Army, Sarah attended medical school using her GI benefits and became a trauma surgeon. She specialized in treating combat veterans, understanding both their physical wounds and the psychological complexities of military service in ways that few civilian doctors could. The Silver Star Medal sits in a frame on her office wall, but patients who notice it are often surprised to learn that she earned it not for medical service, but for marksmanship. Sarah explains that sometimes the two are inseparable, that her commitment to healing lives had required her to take them, and that contradiction had shaped her understanding of what it means to serve others. Years later, when young soldiers ask her about that day in Afghanistan, Sarah tells them that being dismissed as just the medic had been the greatest gift her male colleagues could have given her. Their underestimation had created the element of surprise that made her sniper attacks so effective. But more importantly, she tells them being underestimated had never changed who she was or what she believed her mission to be. She had taken the Barrett rifle not because she wanted to be a sniper, but because she was determined to remain a medic. Sometimes she learned you have to become a warrior to stay a healer. The story of Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun became part of military lore, taught in medical and tactical schools as an example of adaptability and dedication under extreme circumstances. But for Sarah herself, it remained simply the story of a day when she did whatever was necessary to bring her soldiers home alive. Her legacy lives on in the cross-training programs that prepare combat medics for the realities of modern warfare, and in the understanding that serving others sometimes requires us to become more than we ever imagined we could be. The medic who took the Barrett and changed everything had proven that healing and fighting when motivated by the same commitment to preserve life, are not contradictory roles, but complementary aspects of true service.